on the Acrocoin, there was a big shrine for Aphrodite. And suddenly, all the wives of the people around didn't know why their husbands are so spiritual. They all want to worship Aphrodite. Until they found out that in that temple of Aphrodite, there was a brothel. It's not even a brothel. The prophetesses of Diana or Aphrodite were actually prostitutes. And suddenly all the men felt so spiritual, and they started coming from the east and from the west to that city, and they thought that they were actually completing a spiritual journey. And Paul is watching and seeing all this horrible, horrible abomination, all in the name of some deities that are not even true. And if that's not enough, the only people he knows that worship the one God that he knows are the Jewish people. He goes to the synagogue, and the Jews are even more against him. So he's so depressed. And the Lord spoke to Paul in the night by a vision, and he says, do not be afraid, but speak and do not keep silent, for I am with you, and no one will attack you to hurt you. For I have many people in this city. And he continued there 1 year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. Through that dream, God had appeared. Paul, who wanted to leave the next day probably, stayed 1.5 years longer, because God said, even though it's full of pagan people, even though it's full of self-righteous people, even though it's so supposedly religious place, I have many people in this city. Miami, God has many people in this city. And you're depressed, and if you are discouraged by seeing all the junk that you see outside, don't. I haven't seen the temple of Diana yet here. I mean, I see all the ships coming, that's for sure. But I can tell you one thing, God has many people in this city. Do not be discouraged.